Welcome to Podkey Fantasy Football, where camp hype, auction chaos, and sleeper logic get stress tested. A lot of fantasy advice sounds certain, right up until you ask what has to be true for it to work. This week is really about separating useful edges from stories people just like telling. The sharpest auction idea here is the rigid pre-draft budget. The partial. You assign every roster slot a dollar value before the room starts moving, and that matters because auctions don't punish one bad click, they punish drift. If you know your WR room is $52 and your kicker is 1, you can still move $4 or $5 around in the moment without losing the shape of the roster. That's different from walking in with a vague stars and scrubs plan and pretending you'll improvise rationally under pressure. And auctions are non-linear, so trying to convert snake ADP straight into dollars is mostly fake precision. Price depends on nomination order, scarcity, who's already filled a slot, and who's tilting. That's why the pocket value point holds up. Two wideouts in the $25 to $30 range can outproduce one expensive anchor if the tier is flat enough and the hidden win is flexibility after the purchase. Online auctions make this even more important because the pace strips away your time to verify injuries or roster construction. Practice isn't busy work here. It's how you build a default response, so panic bids don't become your strategy. In live rooms, reading opponents actually matters. Repeated nominations, obvious bluff bids, frustration over bids, those are real signals. The caution is that not every weird bid is exploitable genius or irrationality. Sometimes managers just value players differently, but when behavior gets predictable, that is a game theory edge. The market score idea is useful if you treat it as a prompt, not a verdict. Blending overall ADP, positional ADP, and prior production can flag mismatches like Jadarian Price looking cheap relative to his draft capital, but the signal is only as good as the assumptions underneath it. Same with ETR disagreeing with market ADP. Those disagreements usually come from specific inputs, scheme changes, target share projections, injury regression, or how a model handles outliers. Derrick Henry is the clean example. If a model assumes his workload won't regress much, it'll stay ahead of market age fear. That doesn't prove the model is right, but at least the logic is visible. Some gaps are easier to understand than others. Mackay Lemon being lower in ETR than the market makes sense if you expect a limited rookie role early. Garrett Wilson being lower than ADP depends on how seriously you take new target competition. Brock Purdy getting bumped by a scramble rate jump is interesting, but that's also where you want to ask whether the rushing change is sticky or just noise. So the right use of model divergence is investigation. Why is the gap there, and what would falsify the projection? That's a lot more actionable than blindly buying every low market score. Zay Flowers is a good example of a player where the ceiling case isn't random optimism. The touchdown total has been suppressed by bad red zone efficiency, and if that team converts better near the goal line, a top 10 wide receiver jump is plausible. But the uncertainty matters. Touchdown regression is one of the easiest things to say and one of the hardest things to time. The case is stronger if you believe usage stays stable and team efficiency improves, not if you're just chasing last year's bad luck. Tucker Kraft has a cleaner late-round argument. Elite AAC for a tight end can compensate for imperfect volume, and if the Packers' receiver room is weaker and he really earns a big red zone share, then the path to beating ADP is visible. Daniel Jones around QB 25 is also the kind of late quarterback bet that makes structural sense. If the rushing floor returns, you don't need perfect passing efficiency for him to matter. Mackay Lemon is more of a stash than a week 1 target. The easy second-half schedule is helpful, but only if he earns enough role by then. Schedule can amplify talent and usage, it can't create them. And Dylan Sampson over Quincy Jenkins in PPR formats is the exact kind of late-round tiebreaker people ignore. Better receiving efficiency metrics don't guarantee volume, but they do tell you which player benefits more if the offense leans pass-heavy. At running back, workload is still the thing that breaks ties and sometimes breaks rankings. Tre'Veyon Henderson's split profile tells the story. When he leads, he can produce like a league winner. When he shares, the floor falls out. So calling him a fifth-round gamble is fair, but only if you admit the gamble is almost entirely about role clarity. Talent isn't the main question. The coaching point is also stronger than it sounds at first. Certain systems consistently feed backs targets or create easier touches, and that's why scheme-adjacent names matter even when they feel fuzzy in August. Goal line work is another place where fantasy analysis gets flattened. For players like Quinton Judkins or Priest Hall, a small change in touchdown access can move them multiple tiers. That's not narrative, that's scoring math. Henry fits here too. Age-based decline is real in the abstract, but fantasy markets often apply it too bluntly. If the workload and touchdown role remain intact, the age argument by itself is weaker than the production argument. For late-round receivers, ADOT matters because shallow roles often need extreme volume to pay off, and late picks usually don't get that kind of guaranteed volume. A sub-9-yard ADOT can still work, but the historical hit rate is worse and the spike week ceiling is lower. UAC is the counterweight, especially for tight ends and slot players. That's why Tuckercraft keeps coming up. Strong YAC can manufacture fantasy points without requiring deep targets or a huge touchdown total. Per route numbers, like YPRR and YAC per target, are also useful, but only in context. They help identify skill and role fit. They do not magically solve the volume problem. That caution should carry over to training camp. Viral clips and glowing usage notes are inputs, not conclusions. Camp can tell you who is healthy, who is mixing in, and maybe what the coaches want. It usually cannot tell you whether the role survives real games. The legal and medical cases matter because fantasy markets hate uncertainty, but they don't always price it correctly. Rashid Rice has real short-term availability risk, and the softened marijuana policy lowers one suspension pathway, so the stash window matters more than the full-season headline. Josh Jacobs looks different. Mandatory booking without immediate charges creates scary optics, but if the filing timeline lags and the evidence remains thin, the discount may outrun the actual risk. A.J. Brown and Mike Evans are the reminder that medical red flags should move ADP even when upside still exists. Availability risk isn't a moral judgment, it's a pricing question. Format matters here too. In best ball, a high-floor quarterback is less valuable relative to upside stacks and spike weeks, while in auctions it can be perfectly rational to pay a few extra dollars for a dependable quarterback or a high-upside tight end if the weekly edge is real. Trade advice gets overcomplicated. Low balls usually fail because the other manager reads the offer as disrespect before they ever evaluate the players. A fair-looking offer with room to negotiate is usually more effective. Keeper logic is cleaner. Franchise tag the true elite if you have one, because scarcity and flexibility compound. If you don't, then protecting a difference maker at a scarce position like tight end can be defensible. On week 1 betting, the useful idea is market overreaction. Early lines carry more uncertainty around health, role, and quarterback competence, so spreads and totals can drift on narratives faster than on information. The Cowboys and Steelers examples fit that framework, and the underangles in conservative matchups do too. But the edge isn't that week 1 is magically easy, it's that the market is temporarily less certain, so you need a stronger filter, not a looser one. That's the board for this one. Thanks for listening to Podkey Fantasy Football, and keep asking whether the edge is real or just dressed up well. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.